Karl Feilder, thanks for taking your time, coming to our show and telling us how being sustainable and being a CEO is going to actually turn into a profit.
Well, I hope I can do that. Anyway, It's good to see you.
Likewise. So usually what we have is, we have people that talk about disruptive technologies like blockchain, AI, market intelligence.
You mean buzzword bingo?
Yes.
Okay. I can do that too if you want.
So the thing is, we usually bring guests like these that talk about how this is going to really change human interactions and how business are going to be disrupted very, very soon. But after we went through your story, we understood being sustainable, it's very, very important today. And it's a very disruptive factor.
Well, it actually turns out that my own business is not just sustainable, and we don't just make sustainable products, but we also use a lot of tech. And my background is in tech, and in fact we probably one of the few companies on a B2B basis. We sell our fuel using an app. We collect the waste that we collect using an app. We store all of our data on a cloud platform that we designed ourselves. We use Internet of Things sensors to measure what's going on both in dispensing fuel and collecting oil, and all of that's linked up to our cloud-based app. And we use, if you want, we can put in an AI thing. I haven't yet worked out how to get blockchain into the conversation, but I did sell an encryption company in 2006, so I know more about blockchain and encryption than most bunny rabbits.
Brilliant. So for all of us who don't know you much, give us a quick introduction, your journey into Dubai, UAE, and things like that.
I'm getting on a bit now. I've been starting businesses since 1990. Started my first software company in 1990, and we sold it to Microsoft in 95. That's a pretty good way of starting your career. I was originally a software programmer, but in the days when you actually had to write some proper code to be a software programmer, it was the early days before the internet. Then I got involved with various software startups. Did quite well in dot-com times. Then I got involved with fixing broken IT companies for investors, and then sold some businesses. I think my score at the moment is 5 trade sales and 2 IPOs, and then moved to Dubai in 2009 with specific goal here of introducing biofuels to the fossil fuel capital of the world. And most people thought I'd completely lost my marbles at that point. Turns out that it was actually a blooming good idea. So we're now the largest producer of biofuels in the Middle East. We're expanding very, very rapidly. We've had a compound growth over the last 5 years of 42% per year. We've been profitable for 7 years, and we're about to expand outside of the UAE into other countries.
Oh, brilliant. And you talk a lot about sustainability as a factor of growth and as a very important factor for businesses.
Actually, I do more than talk about it. I actually do it. So yes, you're right. I've actually spoken a lot about sustainability as a growth play. It really requires people to reassess pretty much everything about their businesses. And as an engineer originally, I may have started off as a software programmer, but I am originally a proper engineer, and I like understanding the way things work. And when you look at the way our planet works, pretty much all of it is dependent on fossil fuels. And in November last year, the United Nations issued a report, not a bunch of crazies, but the United Nations, that said that we have 21 years to stop using fossil fuels. And pretty much everything from the lights in here, the paint that's here, the table that we're sitting at, this thing, that thing, this thing, they all come from fossil fuels. So any business that doesn't take account of the fact we have to change is really going to have a very short future. And although fossil fuels and climate change are not necessarily the same thing, one of the primary causes of climate change is the fact that for 140 years we've been burning 300 million years worth of fossil fuels. And we haven't worked out a way of completely replacing all that yet, and it's a huge problem.
Brilliant. The thing is, when practitioners of sustainability talk about sustainability, they talk about things like carbon footprint, they talk about climate change, they talk about all these things, which for a business CEO does not make sense, because
I completely disagree with you, but carry on.
Okay, yes. So the reason is because a business is there for turning a profit. If there's no profit, there's no business. So from somebody who's running a business, being profitable is very important. Yeah. So how can people who vouch for sustainability talk in those words and tell them being sustainable can actually make you profitable more than 55 to 81%? I was looking up that.
So there's two misconceptions in what you say. First of all, that sustainability, your suggestion is that sustainability isn't linked to profit, or it's negatively linked to profit. And secondly, that the people explaining sustainability, whether they be CSR people or others within a company, have that as their goal. That may have been the case 10 years ago, but the world has changed dramatically since then. When I started on my sustainable journey, which was about 12 years ago, most of the people that I was talking to who were working in businesses with a title that had something like sustainability in it tended to be arts and humanities graduates, people with degrees in English, history, geography, those type of things. And I don't want to be rude to those people, but carbon footprint is measured to 2 decimal places, and it is an actual way of measuring efficiency. And efficiency is all about numbers. It's about statistics. It's about adding things up and measuring them in minute levels of accuracy. And those type of scientific collection of data is not necessarily what people that are very good at painting pictures or writing long stories are about. And that's been the big shift in my experience, is that companies' sustainability teams now are largely science-based, and they're largely driven by both profit and by real data. And they can't be wishy-washy in what they're doing. So, give you an example, one company that we work with, their sustainability strategy was expressed in smiley faces. So if they were on track, it was a green smiley face. If they were sort of missing their target, it was an amber smiley face. And if they were way off track, it was a red upside down smiley face. And I said to them, well, how do you equate those smiley faces with numbers? And they couldn't. So carbon footprint is actually a way of measuring how efficiently you are using energy in your organization. And every organization, I haven't met one yet, every organization uses energy one way or another, whether it's to move things around or keep the office cool or light the office, or even for their staff coming to work every day. Everything has some sort of energy number. And if you take the premise that fossil fuels are largely causing climate change and we have to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, and you accept the premise that fossil fuels are the primary source of energy on the planet today, if you measure energy, you end up measuring fossil fuels and you end up measuring your climate change. And if you have a strategy to reduce your carbon footprint, you end up using less energy and you end up using less fossil fuels. But when you're using less energy, you save money. And it's really not much more complicated than that. So examples, we have one company we work with that had 650 locations in the UK. They knew as a business how much diesel they used every year, because there was a line item on their accounting system that said transportation costs X million. But they didn't know which vehicles used that fuel, and they didn't know which were the worst drivers. When we started measuring the carbon footprint of each vehicle and the carbon footprint of each driver, we could see that some of the drivers were 30% worse at driving in terms of energy consumption than some of the other drivers. It wasn't that those drivers were driving bigger loads or they're driving different destinations. It was the fact they were just worse drivers. So we retrained the drivers and we put a little bit of tech in the cab to monitor how well they were driving. We improved fuel consumption by 30%. We were able to measure that fuel consumption as a carbon footprint calculation. And then when we reported that up in the organization, you could see the improvement in carbon footprint. There was also a similar reduction in the amount of transportation cost. So there is a completely numbers-based link between carbon footprint and profit.
Oh, no, makes sense. See, you spend less energy and your cost for energy goes down.
Yes.
Simple math. So in terms of that, do you think that if we turn our vehicles to electric, if we have solar panels powering our lights, things like these, if you recycle our tin, would that actually make it?
So we came up with a plan about 12 years ago that some people seem to have forgotten, but anyway, we call it assess, reduce, replace. So assess means measure, preferably to 2 decimal places, what you're doing with energy at the moment. Reduce it without changing anything, just basically retrain your drivers, do something that reduces the amount of energy you're using, and if you're assessing correctly, you'll be able to see what that improvement is. When you've done all of that stuff, look at replacing the source of energy. So there's no point in replacing a very bad driver with a very bad driver in an electric vehicle, because it's still going to be a bad driver. It's still going to be wasting energy. It's going to be not wasting fossil fuels, it's going to be wasting electricity. But the electricity generally is coming from power stations that are coal powered or gas powered or whatever, and they have their own carbon footprint. He will be, on his source of energy, less carbon footprint, but on his actual use of energy, he'll still be high because he's a bad driver. And the same thing goes with temperature in offices. Most offices are too cold. If we manage to measure that, work out what a 1 degree raise in the temperature would save the business in terms of money, got everybody used to working in an office that was 1 degree a bit warmer, then we can look at switching the cooling system in the office to something a bit more exciting, a bit less damaging to the planet. But we've got to assess, reduce, and then replace.
No, perfect. I think since you're here, one more misconception which I want to break over here is we've been hearing about this from probably 3 decades, about how climate change is going to affect us, and a lot of movement has been individual. Yeah, we have been recycling our paper, we segregate our waste together and stuff like that. But in one of your keynotes, the alarming thing that happened, I mean, I got to listen, was 71% of the CO emission is contributed by 100 companies.
Yeah.
So to educate probably, few hundred people into a room is much easier than educating 7.8 billion people on the planet.
Yes, and in fact, the overall climate change impact that humanity has had on the planet has been driven by business decisions. So, for example, here in the UAE, 8 years ago, McDonald's took the decision to run their trucks on 100% biofuel, meaning that when they deliver the food to the restaurants, there's actually 0 carbon footprint of those trucks running to the restaurant. And we've improved the drivers as well. The drivers are very efficient. But anyway, the point being that the customer hasn't had to change his behaviour at all. He still walks in and buys a Big Mac and fries. He's now buying a Big Mac and fries with a lower carbon footprint, but he hasn't had to change his behaviour. Changing the behaviour of 7.5 billion people on the planet, I would suggest, is almost impossible, and actually a complete waste of time, because we can affect the change further up that supply chain by changing the carbon footprint of all the products that we supply and all the services we supply as business people. If we do that, the end user, the consumer, may eventually catch up with their behavioural change, but we'll have already fixed the thing by then. So as you say, 100 companies were responsible for 71% of climate change since 1988. If that really is the case, but not my number, it was an internationally made number, then if we just get 100 companies to behave a bit better, we can truly affect it. And if we can persuade them that making better product choices in terms of carbon footprint will actually make them more profit, then the CEOs will make more bonuses, the shareholders will make more profit, the stock market will increase the value of their shares, everybody will be happy, and we save the planet. Where's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, so in short, I don't have to be vegan, or we don't have to be vegan to save the planet.
No, not at all. I tell you that there is a big problem in that beef is a huge contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. But the companies are doing stuff about that. They're doing research in order to make beef less dependent on both water and in terms of the methane and all the other gases that the cattle release. But they're also looking at synthetic beefs and other newer forms that can be produced in a different way. It still tastes the same, and it's got to taste the same, otherwise the consumer will reject it. But if we get something that tastes the same and has a lower carbon footprint, and the customer doesn't even notice, again, job done.
Nice. So I think these examples, Karl, you're telling me is about big corporations, big companies. I run a marketing agency. We have 10, 15 people working in the company. How can we implement this? I mean, should we implement this? Sustainability, and can we turn a profit, and can we give back to the nature?
I hope so. I'm sitting in your office at the moment. All your lights are on and they don't need to be. It's a sunny day outside.
Okay.
So you're wasting that. I'm also sitting here in a jacket because this is my winter jacket because I was expecting that the office would be too cold. You're about 2 degrees too cold in this office, so we could do that. That would save you some money. I'd suggest that probably all of you drove in your individual cars to come to the office this morning. That would be another way if you did some carpooling, or if you took the bus, or if you took the electric metro. I would also suggest that none of you drove here in an electric car, so that might be a good thing. And I would also hazard a guess that some of you aren't great drivers, but I don't know who I'm insulting with that.
Okay, so every business, if they actually make this a part of the bonus, make this a part of incentive.
Assess. You've got to measure first.
Oh, okay.
So put in place a measuring scheme that says, okay, let's work out what the carbon footprint of our business is, even if it's a small business. Who does drive whatever distance? And when you find out that one of your members of staff is driving an hour and a half every morning in order to come to the office, you might actually say, well, maybe he should move. That might be a better way of solving his efficiency and his carbon footprint. Or maybe you move the office. If you find out that all of your staff are driving an hour and a half every day and you're the only one who isn't, maybe you move the office closer to the rest of the team and then you're the one who does the driving. Until you've measured these things and written them down, you don't know where the solutions lie.
No, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think this will also reduce the traffic from Sharjah to Dubai, and likewise. Yeah. Okay, and the thing is, increasingly after the Industrial Revolution, before Industrial Revolution, nature was like a home. Yeah, it's considered home, and and after Industrial Revolution, nature has become a resource. And companies see nature as something that you can exploit and you can make money from. Yeah, and you talk about things like the ad that was aired in UK about how you can conserve nature, how conserving nature and not converting forest into palm oil cultivations can actually save the planet.
Actually, that wasn't the reason I used that example.
In fact, the reverse is true. I mean, you're telling that doing that and banning palm oil in the UK can actually put 50 million people out of food.
It destroy their income.
Yeah. So,
and in fact, what I was trying to explain with that is that I'm not an environmentalist. I'm just trying to save the planet. And although it's a nice expression, it's really true. Being an environmentalist is hugely complicated. And there's lots and lots of contradictions. So yes, growing palm trees to make oil so that we can have crispier French fries is mad, because it means chopping down rainforest. But when you dig into it, I was in Malaysia recently and I went to go and look at palm plantations. Turns out that most of the palm plantations were planted to replace the rubber plantations. And the rubber plantations were planted when the Europeans, mostly the British, decided they wanted rubber for the tyres on their cars. So that was all done at the start of the 20th century. So the rainforest clearing on the peninsula of Malaysia was all done 100 years ago. And in fact, if we stopped harvesting the palm trees, they would be less efficient at photosynthesizing, which means they'd actually absorb less carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and give less oxygen back to the atmosphere. So a palm plantation that's not well looked after is actually worse for the planet than a palm plantation that simply sits there. And all of these things are complicated. So it turns out that we can't really say that palm trees and palm oil is necessarily driving climate change, because the decisions that businesses took to plant the rubber plantations in the first place were done ages and ages ago. And we can't fix that, we can't undo it. What we can do is we can say, let's use less palm, let's have different strategies for doing it. But one of the things about palm, and I'm just trying to explain that this is complicated, in terms of oil production per hectare, palm trees actually produce more oil than pretty much any other plant that we've got. So in Europe, we're saying we should use something called rapeseed oil or canola as the substitute for the palm oil. But actually you have to put more nitrogen-based fertilizers on the soil in Europe to make it grow, and it still only achieves a quarter of the yield per hectare. So if we've got a problem feeding our planet, we need to be more efficient in our use of our hectares of planting. So actually the solution to all that is probably to persuade people not to eat so many French fries. But I don't see that happening anytime soon either. So there's a lot of complexity. In my world, I'm looking at this as a business decision, and for me, sustainability is about increasing profits of businesses and making sure that in the long term, they're in business profitably. And so I just look at it as I'm just trying to save the planet.
Brilliant. And for businesses to turn a profit along the way.
You can't persuade a business to do something that is completely different to its business objectives. Businessmen are there, they're motivated, they're paid, their share price is totally dictated by their profit. So going to them and saying, I want you to go and save the orangutan, and not draw a straight line between saving the orangutan and their profits, is destined to fail. If you show them how saving an orangutan will make them more profit, they'll jump at it.
Makes sense. So it's profit, it's people, and nature all gets protected if it's linked to the business goals and if it's all aligned together.
If it's done right, yes, and it does require business leaders to take what at the moment is a little bit of a courageous decision, because the public doesn't understand that addressing your carbon footprint can drive more profit. So if you're obviously doing something like Marks and Spencer's Plan A, which is a fundamental part of their strategy, and they said, oh, we're doing this because we're going to reduce our carbon footprint, the consumers don't necessarily understand that that means they're going to make more profit. They look at this and think, oh, they've gone off the deep end, they're all going to be tree huggers and they're going to become vegans. Mm-hmm. And it isn't about that. So I'm trying to encourage business leaders to re-message what they're doing on sustainability. We did a very, very successful project for 3 years within DHL. And our climate change program at DHL, when we were there, was part of the finance department. It wasn't part of the CSR agenda, because we knew we were going to impact the EBITDA of the business, and we did. We made a big difference.
Brilliant. And I think a couple of things, like you've recently started a podcast talking about similar topics. Who are you trying to impact? Who's your target audience here today? I'm
actually trying to help people within businesses to reframe this messaging so that they understand that being an engineer and being interested in the environment and being a profitable businessman can actually be the same thing. I'm trying to help big companies and small companies understand that it is all about maximizing profits and doing it in a green way. But the starting point has to be money. You can't get anybody in a business to do anything if there's not money attached to it. So how do we equate saving this thing or improving our use of that thing? How do we equate that to money? And those calculations are quite hard. But using other people's experience to tell stories of how they've done it and sharing that information means that we can get out to more people. My team, I think the last time we calculated, we reckon that we've had something like 10.5 million tons of carbon dioxide impact in the work that we've done. But we're one team. We've worked with some of the world's largest companies, and I suppose in total we've probably worked with about 10, 15 companies now. And there are thousands of companies. The only way I can get other people to do what we've done and have such big impacts is if I can talk to them and explain what we've done, and they can take it up and go and do it themselves. It's not a situation now where we have to keep our secrets close to our chest and not share them with people. We need to tell everybody on the planet that there's a very serious problem, and by addressing the problem, you can make more profit.
Good. And one last thing we wanted to understand is, are businesses using this as a marketing stunt or a gimmick to attract millennials, people who probably grew up thinking that, okay, at one point we have to be responsible?
Some of them are, but that doesn't stand scrutiny for very long. Millennials, even what some people say, but despite what some people are saying, are actually not stupid. And if the company claims that it's a green company and you turn up and you find they've got a nice leather sofa sitting in their office, then they're going to realise it's a leather sofa. You're not going to be able to persuade them that it's a vegan company when you sit on a leather sofa. So it's what we call greenwash, and there's been a lot of it around for quite a while, with companies claiming that they're doing this, claiming that they're doing that. So it's hard, and particularly in the Middle East where people don't like criticism. It's very, very difficult when a company makes a claim that they're doing something, and I look at it and I just say, well, that's completely ridiculous. How can you claim that that is green or sustainable when it really isn't? And especially if they attach the green or the sustainable label to something without qualifying what they mean by it. You know, I've seen organic clothing.
Organic cotton.
Yeah. So just think about any of that and take it to pieces
No,
and
no, I
ask the
actually bought
question. So in what way is that helping us?
Okay.
I mean, I'd like to know. I'm an engineer. I'd like to see somebody with numbers show me that growing organic cotton with less fertilizer and probably less yield per hectare, which means there's less hectares to feed the people that are going to be buying the clothes, that actually less fertilizer is good. It probably is. But in terms of yield, is it better or not? Don't know. But if the organic cotton is grown halfway around the world and then flown somewhere, then the carbon footprint of getting it to me is a lot higher. And in fact, the best thing to do with all these clothes is assess. I look at actually, here's my best assessment. This is a nice suit. It's now 14 years old. I may be a fashion victim or not. The point is, I use my clothes properly and I reuse them. I don't replace them when they don't need replacing. We've got to stop replacing stuff just because we feel like it. Turns out this suit is actually quite classic cut and I can carry on using it for probably the next 10 years, but we have too many clothes. I look in my wardrobe and I've got too many clothes. I don't need to go and buy any more. I just need to make better use of what I've got. Assess, reduce wastage, and then replace. Don't do the replace thing first.
No, and probably find a good tailor if you want to really.
Absolutely, always a good tailor's a good strategy in life.
Good. And no, I think we've talked about a lot of stuff. And I hope people can actually take away from this where being sustainable and being a CEO that cares about sustainability and reducing carbon footprint can actually turn a profit.
Yes, I don't think CEOs have a choice anymore. I think if it's a bit like being a smoker. In the Middle East, maybe you can still be a smoker and run a successful career, but not in working for me. You know, I hate smokers. I used to smoke long time ago. And I think smokers are ill more often, they're less effective, they're more grumpy, and they smell. So why the hell would I want to employ somebody that smokes? So I don't see, as a CEO, you can be a smoker anymore. And now I don't think you can be a CEO and say you don't believe in climate change, and I don't think you can be a CEO and say you're not going to take it seriously and do something about it. I don't think we have a choice anymore. I think we need to get out there and show the world that this is a business issue, and that we business people are pretty smart and we can fix it. Job done.
Brilliant. Now, the thing is, there's too much of ignorance out in the market, where if people can label their t-shirt as organic and they can sell more of that, there's a lot of ignorance going on in the market. Yeah, people think that doing XYZ is actually saving the planet. I mean, and probably people are looking at that vulnerability and selling more stuff to them, which is
this is why being an environmentalist is confusing, because there's so many contradictory things out there, and as a member of the general public, you really are not equipped to make those sort of decisions. But businesses have teams of people making product decisions about where do we source our cotton from, and what type of farmers do we have, and what's our supply chain like, and how's efficient is the manufacturing operation. So they can make those decisions for you. You might choose or not to buy that product, but in the end, we have to ban things that have really nasty carbon footprints. Now, ultimately, the government will probably be forced to tax them. Governments internationally will probably have to tax things that have high carbon footprints. It's been talked about for 2 decades, but ultimately it will probably happen. So already in Europe, fuel is very expensive. It was already expensive because it was a good source of taxable revenue for the governments. Yeah. But when they equate the problems of climate change with the fossil fuels, they're probably going to increase the prices.
I think one last thing. A lot of our audience are young audience. People who are in universities, probably towards the last leg of finishing their degree. People who are actually passionate about this. Not too much of this is actually taught in the university at this point. How can they learn more about this? How can they be practitioners and be part of companies like yours to drive this much forward? I mean, where can they go and learn?
Well, there's a lot of information online, and indeed the people that you're talking about get most of their information online anyway. The big problem, of course, is there's a lot of rubbish online as well, and they can learn a lot of rubbish things online as well. There are proper taught courses, and a lot of universities now are making their course content available online, even without enrolling in the university. So you can download lots of stuff. There's some good stuff on the TED Talks as well that will talk more about this. But in terms of how can they get involved in companies like mine, I actually would prefer they get involved with companies not like mine. I would prefer they go and work for large organisations and make a change there, put pressure on the senior management from within and say to them, okay, when you're doing your survey of how happy are you in your job, just write on the bottom, I'm not happy because we use too much carbon in our business because the office is too cold, or we're using too much lighting, or I don't like the fact we have leather sofas, or whatever it is. Influence the business to make better decisions internally. So far better to be inside the tent rather than outside the tent. See, being in my world, it's hard. I get up every morning for the last 12 years and tell people that climate change is happening and we've all got to do something about it, otherwise we have a serious problem for our species. And I go into business meetings and people say to me, Karl, it's not at the top of our agenda. And I'm going, okay, so survival of your business and survival of your family is not the top of your agenda. Well, it is, but not today. Okay, well when? When sea levels rise, when the air's so polluted we can't go for a walk, when we can't see the sea anymore, because there's so much pollution in it. At what point does this get to the top of your agenda? I'm absolutely flabbergasted that I have to be the one telling people to take this seriously. And for business leaders, exactly as you've just said, for business leaders to say, we're not doing anything about sustainability because it's going to cost us money. When I look at some of the bonkers things that they do that cost them money, that don't even give them a return on investment, this will give them a return on investment, improve profitability, improve their employment prospects for all of their new staff, and give them a better long-term future. Why the dickens wouldn't anybody do this? So I get frustrated in meetings. So don't join a company like mine thinking you're going to change the world, because most of the time we spend our time trying to persuade people that they really do want to do this stuff. And yet we're still growing at more than 100% a year, so it's a brilliant company.
Now, Karl, best luck for all those initiatives, and we're pretty excited to see now initiatives like these. That when we walk into places like McDonald's, I mean, it's hard to miss McDonald's, and we've seen actually these initiatives, which I'm sure you put a lot of days and hard work behind it, actually come to reality and has touched all of our lives in this office and probably when you walk around and every other person is actually getting impacted because of this. So I think it's a great thing to be proud of.
It makes me proud, that's for sure. I don't spend much time thinking about it because I've got to get on, there's so much big stuff to do. But pride is a great motivator. The right sort of pride, what I call authentic pride. Being proud of things that are really genuine and real, rather than narcissistic pride, which is pride in things that are superficial and not really true. But I do think pride's a great motivator. Yeah, my kids are proud.
Yeah. I mean, the kind of pride that people fake on Instagram, that is not the real pride.
It's not. That's narcissistic pride. It's defined by psychologists as a problem. So they should go and get therapy. Don't post so much online, just go and get therapy instead.
I mean, I think we had a brilliant talk.
Thank you.
And in any way if we could support, I think this is one way we could actually support, put the word around, telling that things are possible, and if we have the right conversations, as business leaders, we can make a difference. I mean, small, big, any difference is good difference. Yeah? As long as we think that climate change is a business problem and not an individual problem, because business decisions are rational. Individual decisions are emotional, impulse. We probably make a decision and then we rationalize it, and that's human behavior. When it comes to business, like you said, when it's moved from CSR to the finance department, it's crazy. Yeah, and how, for example, one company like DHL that you're talking about has the same carbon footprint of 47 countries. And these numbers, okay, now we really need you in the show, because this is really disruptive.
But if you think about that, I mean, DHL is run by a CEO, and I was very fortunate to be able to sit with him once a month for a few years and talk to him about the carbon footprint and about how to reduce it. And over a cup of coffee once a month, we reduced the carbon footprint more than those 47 countries have reduced their carbon footprint in 2 decades, and we did that in a month. And we did that easily because it was a business decision. Businesses caused this problem and businesses are going to fix it. We've just got to make sure that CEOs realise that.
I think in the way with Dubai we say it like mashallah. I mean,
thank you.
I think it's a great job done.
Thank you.
Yeah, and good luck with all the endeavors in the future.
And thank you for having me on your show. Thank you.
Likewise. Yeah,
Cheers.
thanks for your time.
Bye.